We're going to dive into the key takeaways from the conference. Is Nigel Farage claims that Reform can win the next election, making him Prime Minister. What we're going to do, we're going to look at some highlights for you. We've got a video reel of what went down on the weekend.
We can win the next general election just with the numbers of people that agree with our principles. What we have to do is to be credible. What we have to do is to be on the ground everywhere. What we have to do is to show that we can bring success after success after success. If we do that... Back again. So I feel that my promise to professionalise the party is now on track. I also promise you that in future we will be vetting candidates rigorously at all levels. I promise you that. We don't want bigots. We don't want people who think that way, because we represent the silent, decent majority of this great country that we live in. It doesn't matter who leads them. The brand is bust. The brand is broken. People will not go back to them. They've let us down so badly. As for Labour, I mean, goodness me. Have you ever known a new Prime Minister get off to a worse start than Keir Starmer?
Now is the time for the people of Britain to have the courage to speak out before they lose their freedom of speech, and their special way of life, to whatever subversive forces are seeking to undermine us. Be it the European Union, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the billionaires, the World Health Organization, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, crony capitalism, Tony Blair's socialist dream, or other malign forces.
In my opinion, he has given our capital city away, and he should be thoroughly ashamed of himself. Yeah. I was told at the time that I must apologise to Labour's mayor in London. Yeah. Oh, let me tell you now, conference, I will never apologise to that man. Guess what? They've sent me another. Now, what do you think we should do with this? Huh?
Now, the conference was full of the usual right-wing arguments. I mean, Lee Anderson there, he attacked migrants, claiming they broke into this country. He said it was a disgrace that children are taught they can be a different gender, and said he wants his country back. Rupert Lowe, as you just seen him on the clip as well, another Reform MP, and he had a conspiracy-riddled speech. I mean, attacking the World Economic Forum, the EU, the UN, Tony Blair's socialist dream. I mean, what? These were supposedly the forces that have been undermining free speech. He also attacks young people struggling with their mental health and said they are submitting to their problems rather than dealing with them. He attacks big government, which is a US right-wing talking point. We also had Richard Tice. He claims that those who support net zero are from an extremist cult. Now, one major thing that was missing in the conference was people's material conditions. It was all blame, 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 but nothing about improving people's lives. Now, conference did vote on giving members more power, which is Farage selling his shares. Now, Farage also talked about making sure, as you've seen there, that the vetting process was watertight. And I love in that clip, he's like, we are going to make sure our process is better, to a round of applause. That's not something you should, ask for applause. It's something that should be done anyway as a standard. And the idea is to stop bigots into the party, which I find really funny. Now, of course, Reform absolutely does not represent the views of bigots and extreme opinions, proven by this clip.
Because so many people are disillusioned and fed up with this communist government, we need to do something about it. Otherwise, we'll lose Britain forever.
Everything is all about other cultures. It is not about British culture.
To try and help put the country back on its feet again, get the country right, get Starmer out, and make Britain British again.
We're the only political party who's prepared to talk honestly about what I call Orwellian progressive authoritarianism, aka wokeism.
Amongst young men in their early 20s, Reform is the most popular party. I think that's because our generation would really like it if we could afford houses. The only solution to that problem is if we stop making it worse by letting more and more people in.
Because the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are no use. They work for globalists, they work for the World Economic Forum.
I've been a Conservative all my life, and now I am so angry with the lack of action and the wrong attitude, the wokery, the liberal left. I don't consider myself right-wing, I just consider myself having an abundance of common sense.
Can Keir Starmer, could Rishi Sunak, could Daly try and draw these crowds in? Of course they.
I mean, that's right. Britain for the British. The country is communist and globalists are to blame. I mean, nothing like a good dog whistle. And that lady saying she's angry, but I don't think she knows what she's angry about. There's a lot to get into there, especially one of the young men in that video who said, I think the number one, why young men support reform, and the reason why is because they can't get a house. And you're like, well, hold on a second. It's not just men who can't get a house. I mean, it's not gender specific. So what is it about young men that like reform, but other people don't? I mean, material conditions, people trying to get on the housing ladder, that's pretty universal. Now, we're going to go to the panel and let's discuss everything about this weekend. I want to talk first about Nigel Farage trying to professionalise the party, having better processes to stop bigots from becoming candidates. Callum, I see you laughing already. I'll start with you.
Well, he's not really professionalising the party, is he? I mean, he's changed the structure of the party ever so slightly to be less like a company and be more like a political party. But I mean, my understanding is that essentially he's giving members the right now to vote for a leader. So rather than Farage being able to come along and just say, I am the leader, and sort of install himself into that position of power like he did whenever it was before the general election, now members will have an opportunity to put a vote of no confidence in. I noticed something really interesting, which was that if it was something like if 50% of the parliamentary MPs or 100 of the parliamentary MPs, I mean, they're really planning ahead here. They're expecting to be in a position where 100 Reform MPs could potentially put in a vote of no confidence against Nigel Farage. But by opening it out to the members a bit more, you would think that sounds really democratic and it's really sort of making the party a professional party. However, it's my understanding that the way this works is that it will merely be a suggestion. So if members of the party want to vote to get rid of a leader, they will say, we've got no confidence in the leader. And then that will be assessed by the board within the party, who will then decide whether or not they wish to take action, take down the leader, put somebody else forward for the job, or whether they want to keep going as they go. So, yeah, it's not particularly democratic. I think there's a lot of talk, isn't there? We'll probably cover this a little bit later as well. There's lots of talk at the moment about, from within Reform, about them winning the next general election. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't slightly concerned about, some of the rhetoric they've been coming out with and the enthusiasm that many of the supporters seem to have around the party. But come on, I mean, they've got 5 MPs. The Greens have got 4 MPs. And at Green Conference the other week, there wasn't any talk about, being in number 10 in the next 5 years. There was lots of talk about how the Green Party are going to increase significantly their number of MPs, and they've got a very particular strategy in order to do so. But it seems that Reform seem to think that they're going to be able to just get into number 10 in 5 years' time. And I'll be interested to see how it goes. I mean, if they want to be a professional political party and work as a proper political party, then they've got to fight the county and other local elections taking place in different parts of the country next year. And I'll be very interested to see. There was some images on Twitter of the all the attendees at conference signing up to take part in like campaigning, because they're trying to get a campaign group together in different areas. And I retweeted one of them saying something along the lines of, it'll be interesting to see what they all do when they realise that if they want to be a local councillor that they need to care about dog shit and potholes, because I don't think they're going to be interested in local politics at a grassroots level, which is what it takes to win a general election in this country. You need to have the grassroots level politics there with your councillors, as every party, whether it's the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, the Greens, Labour, any political party that's even done slightly well in local elections over a period of time and got progressively better, have proven that they've got a track record of actually being able to look after the local community. And somehow, I don't think dog shit and potholes is quite Reform UK style.
I mean, a real serious political party is something that takes the grassroots seriously, and they start at a lower level. They start at councillors, and you're right, and then they work their way up to MPs, because that's a political party that actually has a will for real change. And you'll look at the general election results, and Reform do really well, but the local election results just before the general election, they were abysmal because they're not a local party. Their popularity is off the back of big money and mainstream media coverage. So it is funny that Nigel Farage talks about winning the next general election, him becoming Prime Minister, and the Greens being more realistic. But in a sense, Farage and Reform have a much bigger chance of making huge national gains because they're always platformed in the media.
Sorry to interrupt you, Curtis, but for that to play out over the next 5 years to a point where Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister and gets in the keys to number 10 in 5 years' time, they have to win successive local elections, because the local elections aren't just a one-off thing, right? And I think what's going to happen is, having given it some thought since I spoke to you about it the other day, I think Reform will do really well in the local elections in May. I think they will, because it'll be a protest vote. People will vote for them. And then people will realise that the local Reform councillors are doing absolutely nothing for the local area. They've not got a track record. They've not got anything to go off. And come the next local elections, a few years later, even a year or so later, depending on whether it's county or, whatever different level of the council it is, all the other parties are going to be able to knock on the door in 2 years' time and say, this is what we've done for the last 12 months. And I don't think Reform are going to have that. And I think they'll do well locally to begin with. But I feel like by the time we get to another general election, they've got to be able to keep that momentum up. And I don't see how they're going to do that unless they are really willing to focus on the grassroots. Because knocking on a door and saying, let's make Britain back British, is great. But that isn't going to fix the traffic lights on the corner. That's not going to get the community centre reopened again. You know what I mean? That's not going to get the youth clubs reopened and get the ASBOs off the streets. It's all that stuff that they're going to have to also care about, which I just don't think they're going to do. And if they can't prove themselves with that, how are they going to win an election?
Well, I mean, so I wonder how much of that comes into play, because let's be honest, the party campaigns on national issues. They campaign on non-issues, but they don't campaign on local issues. They don't talk about people's material needs. It's all just wokery. So the people that are going to vote Reform, I mean, either they're not going to blame their local councillor if things don't get done, or what a lot of right-wingers do, they'll blame somebody else. So if a local Reform council doesn't do something, they'll blame the government, or they say, they've been stopped because of wokeism, whatever it is. Now, I accept that's probably going to be the core Reform votes. Obviously, they need to sort of expand to do well. I'm going to bring it over to Lewis. Lewis, so we'll bring it back to the original point. Nigel Farage, he thinks that bigotry has no place in Reform. He wants to try and improve the processes to get, better candidates. I mean, first of all, what do you make of that? And secondly, isn't that part of the ideology of Reform? I mean, we saw that vox pop of those that support the party. I mean, how can you block people with certain views when their MPs are making speeches using conspiracy theories and pretty racist dog whistles?
Yeah, he used the words, we need to look credible, or along those lines, which means he admits that, he knows they're not credible. We had, Rupert Lowe talking about the globalists and the World Economic Forum, all of these type of issues. That's only going to welcome these weirdos into the party. So how are they going to How are they going to vet those people? How are they going to reject these people? They're not. They're just going to continue to welcome these insane conspiracy theorists, despite the fact that the things that they complain about, the globalists, the everything from the North London elitists to the establishment, they are the establishment. And this is the funny thing about it. This is the just juxtaposition that we're dealing with, is that they're talking about we need to make the party credible by allowing certain people into the party, but also at the same time fighting the establishment when they are the establishment. We have a former stockbroker who's leading the party. We have Richard Tice, who continues to be a property magnate who's made millions off the property market. We have what's his name? Oh God, I've gone blank. James McMurdoch, who worked for Goldman Sachs and the Lehman Brothers. Like the list just goes on. 3 of them went to private school, right? So I don't know who they're actually trying to attract, because they're saying that they're not going to admit bigots into the party, but they're also anti-establishment. Who is it exactly is going to be joining this party to become an MP in the future, to become a councillor? I think it was our friend of the show, Helena, who said a couple of months ago that Reform have hit their ceiling, and I do kind of agree with that. If we again look back at the 2015 Reform UK vote, they got, what was it, like 3.9 million or something along those lines, about 15% of the vote. And then in the most recent election, they got just over 4 million. They've gained about 200,000 to 300,000 voters in the space of 9 years, less than 10%. Where else can they possibly go? So I do kind of agree with this assessment of they've kind of hit their ceiling. Maybe they can increase their vote share enough, but to become credible by also not admitting bigots while going against the establishment, while being the establishment, I don't get how all of this makes a recipe of success in any way.
I mean, I think we know who exactly they're appealing to, but there is a contradiction, as you've rightly pointed out. They're pitching themselves anti-establishment, and more political campaigning these days have rode on this anti-establishment wagon, when 9 times out of 10 they are just the establishment with a different flavour, and that's what Reform is. It was actually quite interesting when Nigel Farage, he correctly pointed out and said, it doesn't matter who's the Tory leader, the brand is broken, right? But notice he says brand, and if you read between the lines there, that's all he sees it as, a brand, because Reform are the same ideological party. They support the same economic system, and to a large extent they support the same social policy, just a bit more extreme than the Tories, but they're no different. They're still Thatcherites, they're still pro-capitalists, they're still rich people who want a political party in their rich interest.
Does that not help them though? Because that makes them more appealing to your average Conservative voter almost as well. Because if they can say we are the Conservatives just with a different colour tie, then is that not a good thing for them? Because it helps them over the next 5 years pull more people across, especially depending on what happens with the Conservative leadership, right? If they get someone who's a bit sort of middle down the road, if it's Generic or Tugendhat, for example, as opposed to Kemi Badenoch, she's still in the running, I think. Do you think that might not make more Conservative members say, well, actually, we want someone a bit more radical, so we're going to go to Reform, because they are the Conservatives with that extra flair?
Well, I don't know whether it's a good strategy or not. Probably is a good strategy, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that when we have to reach people who are thinking about voting Reform to say these are charlatans. And I'm using Nigel Farage's sort of speech, or when he called the Tories brand, I'm using that as evidence to prove that Reform aren't offering anything different, despite the fact that they say they are, despite the fact that the people who support them, those at the conference, think they are different, think there's hope here, and they're different to the Tories and Labour. And I'm trying to show people, obviously they're not going to be completely overt in their language, but sometimes you've got to read between the lines. And if someone sees another political party as a sheer brand, to me that's more evidence to say we are the same. And they are the same. If you look at, first of all, we'll get onto it in a second, but there was no talk about people's material needs. For all the talk of Reform saying we support the working class, there's absolutely nothing in their manifesto or nothing in their ideology that supports the working class. Quite the opposite. So they're not offering anything different to the Conservatives, and by extension, I would say, in a way, Labour, because Labour subscribes to the same economic system and economic agenda with austerity, with neoliberalism, and that is exactly what Reform is. It's a Thatcherite political party. It's all just washed up ex-Tories. That's all it is.
Even though Farage is obviously a populist and the Reform Party is a populist party, I still don't feel like they've properly fully refined their populism. I think Nigel Farage has, but it's easy for him when he's
cult personality with Farage, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. But obviously, he forever has just been the complainer. He's able to point at something and go, look, that's bad, but not actually have a solution for it. But now they're in this position, they need policy, and they're still not giving it to anyone. Again, you said it right off the bat. It's just a bunch of people moaning and blaming people and blaming things, but they're not actually providing any tangible solutions. If they can perhaps, I'm not giving advice to Reform UK and Nigel Farage, but if they can perhaps tie their populism into some form of policy that sounds appealing to people, then perhaps they could increase that voter base. But until then, they won't, because they have nothing to offer in any way. The only way I feel like they could get free votes is if the Labour Party in the next 5 years just absolutely fail at every level, which, we will continue to hold the Labour Party accountable. But at the same time, I wish them well, not just for the sake of keeping the Reform Party out of power, but for the sake of the country. But their populism still needs a bit of refinement, because, again, they have nothing to back it up with. When have we ever actually heard Nigel Farage, with the exception of the last few weeks of the election, actually talk about any policy ever in any way, in anything to do with the economy, anything to do with any actual positive change in any way, structural change in any way? He hasn't. There is nothing to quote.
So what do you think has to happen, Lewis, for him to, for Reform to win an election? What do you think needs to happen over the next 5 years? If you were going to advise them, what would that advice be? Because I suppose what I'm asking is there a path to number 10 for Reform in the next 5 years?
Yeah, obviously, if the Conservatives don't sort themselves out, if Labour absolutely fail at every level and have some serious scandals, because some of the scandals that are going on right now aren't great, but they're not like the worst things that have ever happened in political history, right? They're very light scandals, the type of stuff that Labour are dealing with right now. I'm talking about deep-seated kind of, Partygate level kind of scandals. If they have a few of them, and on top of that, if the Reform Party actually formulate policy in line with their populists complaining and blaming everybody else, then maybe they could make significant gains. But going from 5 MPs to a majority in the space of 5 years, exceptional things would have to happen, like literally going to war, I don't know, but going from 5 MPs to a majority is near on impossible. But again, who knows, maybe this clip will be clipped in a few years and I'll be memed, who knows, this guy was wrong.
I definitely disagree with the position that Reform have hit their ceiling. I know that was Helena's quote, but you kind of agreed with it. We've said this so many times. Well, this is their ceiling, and they've broken the ceiling. Now, you brought up something which is why I think I'm right in my assumption here, and that's the Labour Party. Of course, Reform's main target at the moment is ex-Tory voters, but they're not just going for Tories, they're going for Labour too. And actually, when we covered the election live, there were many seats where you had up to a third of the Labour vote went to Reform. So Reform are coming for Labour. And the fact that Labour's vote isn't particularly holding up, I mean, they didn't really have a vote in the first instance, did they? It was 9 million votes, which is shockingly bad, given that you're supposed to be a changed Labour Party, an electoral machine. And their polling now is just abysmal. They're only a couple of points ahead of the Tories, which means also only a couple of points ahead of Reform. Then you will see a hemorrhage of votes from the Tories towards Reform. And I would say, even if you got 20% of Labour voters going to Reform, that could make them the largest party. So I think it's actually entirely plausible that in 10, 15 years' time, we'll see a scenario where no political party gets a majority, but Reform gets the plurality of MPs. And I think it'll be because as we see that first past the post, that system, the cracks are going to emerge even more. I mean, we're already seeing it now, but we're going to see, I reckon, here's my prediction, even though political predictions are really not advised, in 15 years' time, we're going to see a historic low amount of seats when it comes to first past the post in way of one party. And what I mean by that is, instead of a party winning a minority government where they're just short by 20 seats, I can entirely see it where one political party gets 200, 220 seats, and they're the largest party, but they're still short by over 120, something like that. Something that's never really happened, and I could totally see Reform doing that. So just by winning, picking up votes from the hemorrhaging parties, don't think it's enough to get a majority, but I think it's enough to get a sizable minority, making them the biggest party. Not necessarily particularly effective in government, because without a majority, you're going to find a lot of issues there. But I could see them being the largest party.
It would be an interesting coalition when the Greens do the same, wouldn't it?
I just don't know. I don't see Reform ever getting the majority, even if they don't get enough to really secure a strong majority with Nigel Farage. I think, even though I think this is part of the ceiling conversation that I'm having, is that, again, if you look at that vote gain, just 300,000 voters have moved to Nigel Farage, essentially, because that's what it is, essentially, over the space of 9 years. Under that rate, I just feel like his name is too toxic. And he's reformed his name a little bit by going on I'm a Celeb, and he's got his TV's £100,000 a month TV show that he gets paid for, and that's probably won him some voters over. And young men are turning a little bit more right wing, and some of those voters might be activated when they turn 18. But other than that, I see his name as being too toxic. Can't.
You've got to remember, Keir Starmer's personal poll ratings is worse than Farage. So if Keir Starmer could be Prime Minister, he has
people hate Nigel Farage.
Well, I mean, but also some people love him, so you can.
But it's also true to say, and he was introduced this way at conference, it's also true to say that he has been one of the most influential politicians this country has had in many,
hands down,
many years.
He is the most influential politician in the last 30 years. That's not even a question.
Although that said, it's also taken him 7 or 8 attempts at standing for election before he's actually managed to be elected, which I think also speaks for something.
Possibly, but I think someone like Farage and his political operation, like winning a seat is actually the least significant part. He's managed to foster change just by doing speeches outside of Parliament. He's set the debate on immigration. He's trying to set the debate on wokeism. I mean, if it wasn't for Farage, we wouldn't have had Brexit. He did all of that without being an MP. So I know what you're saying. Well, it took him 8 times to be an MP. Kind of irrelevant, if you ask me, because the national discourse is the most important thing. Because you're going to have Labour MPs who are now trying to be really, really reactionary on immigration. So it doesn't matter if it's a Labour MP rather than a Reform or a Tory or somebody else. They're doing the same policy. And it's all because of the national debate has moved largely because of Farage.
On the flip side of that, though, and just because I wouldn't be me if I didn't bring the Greens up again, when Caroline Lucas stepped down as an MP before the last election, one of the reasons that she cited for stepping down was that she found that she was able to make more change as an activist on the outside than she was as a single MP on the inside. And actually, Farage still has that media attention around him, and he still has that. The fact that he's Nigel Farage going for him, but actually, in terms of practically making a change, I think he will find it more difficult inside the House of Commons than he would have done had he spent the next 5 years. Could you imagine if Reform had 5 MPs and Farage wasn't one of them, and then Farage was the leader of the party from the outside, like what's happened with the Green Party in the past, and he was continuing to do everything he does from outside of Parliament with 4 Reform MPs on the inside? I think that might have a bigger impact than Farage being there on the inside.
But then I would kind of agree, or slightly counter that with the fact that the left and the right don't play the same rules, or they're not given the same game. So yes, left-wing MPs, Caroline Lucas feels that she's probably more of an activist outside of Parliament, which is true. But the right play politics on easy mode. And I know I was just saying that Farage can do so and has done so much change without being in Parliament. However, with 5 Reform MPs, the media are obviously platforming them even more. So it is the fact that Greens have 4 MPs, the media don't want to touch them. So I think we're in a very bad situation now where Farage historically has managed to foster change significantly without having any power, should I say.
I think
now
you give him a little bit
5...
too much credit, though, because
I mean, I don't.
I think you're making the point that I want to make. You're kind of making for me, and it ties in with what Callum is saying. Is that Farage kind of can't create anything; he can only jump on top of things, right?
Sure.
People give him credit for Brexit, but obviously, he helped it get past the post. But it's not like he was Brexit. Like, he was the face of it because the media made him that way, and he had a loud voice, and he was extremely annoying. But maybe Brexit wouldn't have happened with or without, and we don't know. Like, he helped get it past the post, but I still think people give him way too much credit for stuff like that. I really, truly do. He's only able to jump on top of things. If you actually sit down and watch his show on GB News, which I occasionally do just to kind of see what his talking points are, he's unable to actually make change from scratch. He's never actually created a conversation. He's only jumped on top of things, right? He's only reacted to them. He is not a grassroots builder, which, they've been talking about. They're going to copy the Lib Dem plan of doing the grassroots thing by working on the streets, by building up a really grassroots kind of thing that's going to connect the communities and build up their name and do all this counseling stuff. And it goes back to what Callum was saying. I just don't think they're capable of doing that because they're so just reactionary. That's their brand. That's everything.
I don't think they care
do.
about that stuff. Like that, your average reform member doesn't give a shit about the community centre. He cares about the hotel that's full of asylum seekers. They care about that, but they don't care about the fact that the libraries have closed or that the community centre's been shut down. And actually, the really sad thing in all of this is that for a lot of these people that support reform, they're actually the people that are suffering as a direct result of the fact that the youth clubs are gone and the community centres are gone. I mean, reform is arguably a symptom of all those grassroots things that the Tories have absolutely decimated over the last, decade and a bit. And they're the ones who, their lives are affected by that, but they're told to care about the other things rather than those things, if that makes sense. So I just can't see them do it. I can't see those people in the vox pops, like I say, banding together and doing a local litter pick in the local park, for example. And actually, grassroots politics at the deepest level is literally that. They talk about communities coming together. They don't mean everyone going down the pub and watching the football. They mean people going out and actively campaigning to make their community a better place.
I want to bring up a comment because this person said something which I was just thinking the same point here, actually. I'm going to bring it up from Jay. It's interesting to remember that UKIP could not get any traction with the British electorate before the global banking system collapsed, the 15th of September 2008. And I was just thinking when you said about how reform sort of bubbled up, and it was the financial crisis. Now, I want to try and bring the entire political conversation. I know we're just 3 people. It'd be very tough to do. I want to start talking more about 2008 again because we've forgotten about it, right? No one talks about 2008, and it's crazy that the entire global economic system was shocked, right? The Western Hemisphere was completely shocked with the markets collapsing, and essentially, how many years on? I mean, 16 years on? And nothing's been done. In fact, we rewarded the bankers by giving them bonuses. None of them went to jail. People's lives have been destroyed. And it's crazy that no one speaks about this, even not on the left. I want to see it more on the left. And that's exactly what reform is, right? And I think that's such a good point from the commenter, Jem, and he's been on a few times, that UKIP, they had their audience, but they couldn't break through. And that was largely before 2008. And of course, when financial crises happen like 2008, it doesn't happen straight away because people will say, well, UKIP fought the 2015 election. Yeah, it takes a few years to sort of, for the cracks to show. But whenever there is a financial crisis, countries always move to the right. There's always a left-wing insurgents, but unfortunately it's always the right that win because you've got centrist politicians who side with the right and the media also platform the right. And now we're at the precipice of essentially the outgrowth of 2008. And I think we thought it was 2015 with the rise of Jeremy Corbyn, with the rise of Syriza, with the rise of Bernie Sanders. I mean, of course, that was part of it. But I think we thought, do you know what, that's the, and centrists would love this, which they're wrong about, which is 2015 was the sort of the crisis point, and that's where populism began, but it's also where it's going to fail. And then obviously Bernie Sanders didn't win the nomination, Jeremy Corbyn didn't win, and, you know, sort of grown-up commentary at people will say, thank God the centrism is back. I mean, we're seeing articles like that. They think it's through Macron, although he's not a centrist. They think it's through Starmer. But actually, the underlying issues are still there. Just because the left failed doesn't mean populism is gone. And now we're seeing the right, through Reform and many other people, come back in a big, big way. And I think it's something that we should really discuss more and more, which is also a huge contradiction, because given that the 2008 crisis was very much about the material, Reform's policies are anything but material. It's all about made up shit, wokeism, something that's, you know, the ghost that isn't there. But it just shows the anger hasn't disappeared, even something like 16 years later. I mean, people in the mainstream media like to think that was in the past. They think it's ancient history. There's no point talking about it anymore. But since the fundamental issues hasn't been fixed, then the anger isn't going to go away. And I think we're seeing it through Reform. And
but is
Reform? Oh, you go ahead, Callum.
Well, I was just going to ask, is Reform the sort of the consequence of the crash of 2008, or is Reform the consequence of the 14 years of austerity that followed?
I think it's all connected.
It's arguable we wouldn't have had the austerity without the financial crash. But and without the Tories, but at the same time, I don't know. I wonder how much of it is the actual, you know, financial crisis itself, and how much of it is a direct result of the shitstorm that followed.
I just want, let's just lay it out for like people listening as well. Like, this isn't my area of expertise anyway, but this is like the basics of it. Is that essentially before the crash, our economy was growing at a healthy rate. You know, I hate talking about the economy, I hate talking about growth, but this is the system we sadly live in. So this is the way it works. We were growing at a healthy rate, and then after the crash, this is when we started seeing growth rates of 0.1% a year, 0.8% a year, as opposed to the healthy 2 and 3 that we used to have. America is still growing at a rate of about 4 or 5% every year on its economy. It's still doing pretty well, but loads of the Western countries, especially Western European countries, have been massively struggling, including the UK. And because the cost of everything has been going up every year, that fancy word that always gets thrown around, inflation, all the time, people still don't really understand it. I still barely understand how everything is interconnected. But the reality is our economy hasn't grown, and the cost of things have gone up, and therefore we have less money to spend on other things. And that's essentially obviously where austerity came in. And the issue is because we don't have this growing economy, because we have inflation, everybody is poorer. And because of all that, this is what has essentially happened over the last 14 years, obviously through austerity, is that everything has just failed. Every system has failed. Obviously, a big part of that is to blame for the Tories. But going again back to the crash, the economy is such a hard thing to understand. Nobody out there understands it. You can put 100 economists in a room and everybody will disagree with each other on how this thing called the economy actually works. But the issue is that it goes back to what you're saying, Curtis, about this thing happened. Everything has been fucked since then, essentially, and nobody got held responsible for it in any shape or form. But the media will be like, well, Gordon Brown sold the gold, so everything's his fault. That's why we're so poor. Then in combination with like the media, the right-wing pundits and people like Nigel Farage, we spent the last 14 years blaming all of the wrong things on why things are so fucked. And Reform are offering, as you said, no policies at all that are going to remedy any of that. In actual fact, again, they keep talking about how they're anti-establishment. Nothing that they're offering is anti-establishment. You know what? I'm anti-establishment. I want to change all these systems that we have, this system of infinite growth, which is destroying us right now. But they're offering none of that. And the issue is that the vast majority of this country, the vast majority of voters, I'm not calling everybody stupid, because again, nobody truly understands the economy, but none of us are actually pointing at the right problems. Nobody's actually talking about them, because some of them are boring. talking about housing is for a lot of people boring. It doesn't sell newspapers. It doesn't get people watching TV. It doesn't get views on TikTok, right? So people will constantly talk about issues which either get them attention, make them money, and fill their ego. And this is where we're at. And this is where populism comes in. And nothing continues to get fixed because people are unwilling to talk about the reality of the situation that we are in. Sorry, that was quite a rant.
I mean, question to anyone who's watching who likes reform or supports them. There's not going to be many of you, but if you are, I want you to listen to this. What is it about reform that makes you think they're anti-establishment? What's the most dominant economic system in the entire world right now? It's capitalism. Okay. Who's the only political faction in the entire world that either critiques capitalism or wants to abolish it altogether? It's socialists, it's communists, it's anarchists, it's the left. So when the right say they're anti-establishment, how are they anti-establishment when they still support the economic system that is literally in order right now, which is capitalism? And that is why, again, why right-wing political parties like Reform won't talk about people's material needs is, one, because they don't care, but two, they will absolutely expose themselves because they want to have that anti-establishment insurgents label. But as soon as you start connecting the dots saying, hold on a second, you're a Goldman Sachs banker. I mean, Nigel Farage, you're an ex-Tory City banker. You're all really, really rich. Hold on a second, you've not critiqued capitalism even once. How are you anti-establishment? Obviously, those questions aren't asked in the mainstream media, which is insane, which is why we exist, which would be incredibly helpful to hopefully sway some people who think reform are the answer and go, hold on a second, are they? Because we've heard all their shit before, just different ways of saying it. I mean, for the last 40 years, even longer actually, all we've talked about is immigration. I love it when the right say, we never have a sensible conversation about immigration. Immigration is one of the most talked about things in the entire world, or at least in politics. So don't tell me that's never talked about. And it's always, 99% of the time, framed by the right. I mean, you get laughed at if you say, I mean, by the way, no one on the left actually says this. I mean, the lefties who probably like this, but no one on the left who, in the media, at least, say we want open borders. No one says that. If you did, you get laughed. But we've got now political parties, Reform, saying we should have a referendum of net zero on immigration, that's crackpot. That's crazy. It's populism. We'll go on to these speeches in a second. I do want to say, though, that if you enjoy what we're doing, right, not just today, but what we're doing for the last couple of months, couple of years, and you want to support us, then you can. You can do that by just sharing our content with your friends and family, or your beloved Reform family members, whoever. Share us, like our videos, comment. But you can also support us financially, because unfortunately, things need money to run, and we all have our full-time work, and we're doing this around our full-time work. It's very tiring, it can be, and we want to do this full-time. So if you would be so kind, if you can, then you can donate to us by going to our new website. It's a bit rusty at the moment. By going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, you can give us a one-off donation, or you can support us monthly. That donation will go into a pot, and that pot can be used for equipment, can be used for travel expenses, whatever. And the ultimate goal is to get to the point where we can start paying ourselves and we can move on from our other jobs and focus our efforts here. Of course, that's a long time coming, but we can only ask. But I really appreciate everyone who's watching right now. We've got 120 people watching concurrently across Twitter and YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in so far. This is the Reform Conference special. I'm with Lewis, Aaron and Callum Taylor. I want to get back to the speeches. We've done Nigel Farage's speeches. We'll start off, we'll go to Lee Anderson. You saw in that clip, he ripped up a letter about the BBC licence fee. Would you reckon that's actually the real licence fee letter? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. He attacked migrants. He attacked trans people, claimed the country has been taken away. Lewis, I want your thoughts on Lee Anderson and his speech.
50p What 50p flip flop?
30p now it is.
30p.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, he's been upgraded to 50p now.
I'm combining two things because he's a flip flopper, right? This is the guy who went from Labour to Conservative to Reform in the space of what, like 8 years, I think it is. This guy is literally so inconsistent. But what's funny about Lee is that when we talk about, you know, the foundations of the Reform Party with because they are the establishment, when it's Richard Tice, Nigel Farage, these rich people who went to private school, who are telling all these like working class people that, because that's their audience, that we need to do all these things. Lee is that person. Lee is actually a representation of the type of person that they're trying to appeal to. So he does have that appeal, but under any scrutiny, pretty much everything that he does or says just falls apart. You know, this obsession with Sadiq Khan can only be constantly perceived as continuous racism. It is abhorrent. Why is it a guy who's based in Ashfield, so obsessed with an area of the UK that literally has almost nothing to do with him? This constant attacking, because he believes in these conspiracy theories, right? The, you know, Islamists have taken over Khan, they've taken over London. There's no go
He
zone.
said it publicly, and that's crazy because in that clip he was like, "I've been asked to apologise. I will not apologise." I mean, no one was asking him to apologise to
the postcode that I live in, Curtis. The postcode that I lived in at the time was a no-go zone. I lived in Tower Hamlets when he said that. It's just an absolute joke. He doesn't live in reality. And when we go back to the very beginning of the conversation, when we're talking about like who are the people they're trying to attract to the party, it is these people, these voters who, you know, when I spend time on TikTok, when I spend time in debates online and in person, and I meet people who are from random parts of the UK who haven't been down to London in 20 years, they're convinced that it's been changed into this absolute Islamist hellhole. And I find that hilarious that they're more concerned with what's going on in London because of what Lee Anderson's saying than actually what's going on in their own back garden. It's just pure and utter racism. The fact that he carved out time to talk about Sadiq Khan. And again, no policy, no nothing. It's just ripping up a BBC letter, complaining about everything, being racist, and just pure populism. That's all it is.
I mean, it's all emotive.
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, sorry to cut in, but I was going to say it's all emotive, and that's why we will see a lack of policy from the right populists. I mean, let's just call it fascism. I'm not saying that every Reform voter or supporter is a fascist, by the way, but I am saying there are fascist elements within the party. So when people say right-wing populism, that tends to mean fascism. So fascist talking points, we'll stick with that then. They're always very vague, right? Every fascist in history are always very vague. And that's the point, right? It's supposed to catch a wide net, and it's supposed to build to emotion, right? You want to be angry. So people think Reform, who really buy into the project, they, you know, it's. I think it's a liberal mindset to say they're all racist, that's why they support Reform. I think is incorrect, and I think you're not. There's no way you can tackle this if that's your view. Of course, there's a lot of racism within Reform. Of course, racists support Reform, but it's bigger than that. And I think a lot of people genuinely think that Reform can change things for the better. They think they have this emotion within them saying this is like a political revolution. Finally, someone's come along. The same way that we felt hope for Jeremy Corbyn, right? Now, of course, once again, the mainstream commentariat will say the left and the right are exactly the same because, oh, look, you can look at certain signifiers that are similar, means it must mean they're the same. But the difference is Jeremy Corbyn had a litany of policies, which I liked and a lot of people liked. And we thought this can fix the country. I have hope in Jeremy Corbyn. He was a left-wing populist. The right, they don't have policy. They just have vibes and anger. There's a lot of Reform people who feel like things will change for the better. That's why they'll say, I mean, people like, I feel so hopeful. I mean, I don't understand how you can be hopeful from the idea that you're attacking migrants, right? Or saying we're going to reclaim England.
It's because it's people. No, it's no disrespect to, you know, and I'm not saying this about everyone that votes for Reform, but I would extend this point to the majority of the British electorate are not literate in politics. They don't understand politics in the way that we do. You? No, but I think the reason that's important with Reform is because actually, you know, I mean, what scared me, Lee Anderson got on that stage within 30 seconds of him starting his speech. He'd already made a pop at migrants. He'd already made a pop at trans people. And the people in the room were absolutely loving every second. They were cheering and whooping as if he'd just come out and said he was going to give them all £1 million. Like, they were over the moon that he'd said, you know, a boy playing with a doll doesn't make them a girl, which nobody has ever claimed it does, for Christ's sake. Like, that isn't even the discussion or the argument, but he's making that the discussion or the argument because most people would agree that that idea that a boy playing with a girl or wanting to wear pink somehow that makes them a girl is such a ludicrous idea that nobody's going to agree with that. But it's because that isn't what people are arguing. But these people lap it up and they love it and they think, yeah, that's right. If my son plays with a doll, that doesn't make him a girl. But then they will use homophobic slurs and berate him when he says he wants to wear a tutu and start learning how to dance, of course. But that's a whole other argument. But I think what concerns me about this is that there is an element of, and I know I'm kind of contradicting what I said earlier about the grassroots thing, and you know, having to care about potholes and dog shit, but there is an element of if they say something that they believe in, then they're going to get the support. What I'm trying to say, I'm not wording it very well, is, you know, these people believe that Sadiq Khan is going to be installed into number 10 in the next 2 years through some plot within the Labour Party. They believe this, right?
Yeah.
They genuinely think that he's gonna be stepped down as the mayor of London, and he's gonna become the Prime Minister. So anytime Lee Anderson can step on the stage and make a pop at Sadiq Khan, he's not making a pop at some politician who's mayor of a city that has no connection to Lee Anderson. He's making a pop at a guy that they believe is going to be the next Prime Minister, and that's how they see it in their mind. They're going after the guy who's going to be in number 10 in 2 years' time, before the next general election. They're going after the guy who's going to introduce Sharia law into the UK in 2 years' time when he becomes.
Oh, he already has, Callum. He already has.
Well, he's already done it in
two
London.
boroughs of London, according to an LBC caller on a few months ago.
But because some of them genuinely believe this, when they hear it from the politicians, and bear in mind the politicians are the ones who are supposed to be politically literate, right? You know, we're just the folks, you know, we're just the plebs in the street. We're not supposed to know about these things. But the people that go into the House of Commons every day and that walk into that, you know, 100 years old building and represent us every day, they're the people that are supposed to know what they're talking about. And if they're standing on a stage and they're saying that you know, people believe that boys can be girls, boys are girls because they play with dolls, or that you know, that we should all just not pay our TV license because they're all, you know, the BBC is some left-wing talking point that are pushing out a load of left-wing propaganda, which any left-wing person who watches the BBC will tell you is complete and utter nonsense. The fact that he can stand on a stage and say that, these people go, well, I thought that was the case, but if he's saying it too, and he's the guy who's supposed to know what is on about, then it must be true.
Well,
if he's going after Sadiq Khan, it must be true that he's going to be PM.
I think
there's a difference on his show from about, I think it was about 2 years ago, where his son came home from uni. Do you know which clip I'm talking? I wish I would have almost brought this onto the show. It's like, just to sum up who Lee Anderson is, he told this really serious story on his show, which is filmed in a pub, or is it still filmed in a pub? I don't know. And he's like, oh God, one day my son came home, he's got a new fancy haircut, and he's looking, oh, you can tell he's been to uni. He comes in and he sits me down and sits me on the sofa and says, like, Dad, I've got something to tell you. And he's like, oh God, what is it? What's happened? You know, it sounds like a coming out story, like he's about to say he's gay or something. And he goes, Dad, I'm a vegetarian. And he's like, he couldn't believe it. He was genuinely stunned. He was in shock. He was really hurt that his son was a vegetarian because the lefty unis have changed his hair and changed his diet. It's like, this type of stuff is just, but you know what? People eat it up. Literally, they eat it up, right? That's
what scares me, Lewis. That's what scares me.
I mean, I want to
meat eater stuff is just, I can't.
I mean, I want to make a point here, though, that there are two different things here. There are big reform supporters who go up to the conferences and lap this stuff up, right? They're the sort of people you can't reach, you can't convince. I don't particularly care about them that much because they're just too far gone. But there's another subsection, well, not subsection. There's the ordinary just voters, right? And I think there's a distinction. So I think I disagree in the sense when they say, well, you know,
but I don't think
these people are low IQ. And I would say, well, at the end of the day, 99% of people or the electorate are not politically engaged. And
I'm not saying they're low IQ, by the way. I'm just saying they're not politically literate.
Okay, politically literate. But I don't. but then you sort of then went to the example of like reform people supporting these conspiracies, right? But again, I'm not that interested in the hardcore reform people. I'm worried about those who aren't, you know, they wouldn't buy into crazy conspiracy theories, but they are swayed by reform because they're sick.
These are the same people that Lewis and I spoke to, you know, on Whitehall when it was kicking off in London. When the riots started, who were angry because a Muslim man had gone and killed 3 girls in Stockport, right? Two elements of that story that were not correct, but that's what they were angry about, and they were so angry they took themselves to the streets of London to riot, and then we saw what happened since. And I don't think those are the same people that went to a political conference in Birmingham this weekend. Yeah. I don't think those are the same people.
I would say because that what you're saying there is a very pervasive view across people who vote all political parties. A lot of Labour voters would think that. I think it's different to say someone has been convinced by the mainstream media, like the way the race riots were influenced. I mean, that is widespread. I think that's different to then saying, oh, Keir Starmer's communist or the World Economic Forum. I mean, most people don't even know what the WEF is.
Clearly they don't know what communism is either.
Well, exactly. The only people who know what WEF is are online people or those who go up to conferences, particularly Reform Conference. But the same people think, do you know what? Those damn immigrants who are killing our people, that can be anyone in the country, unfortunately. That can be anyone who voted Labour, Tory, whoever. And that kind of lie, that's the sort of lie that hits people that you don't think, oh, they're not really far gone, that they bought into crazy conspiracies that the UN is behind ending free speech, which is what fanatics believe. But non-fanatics are being convinced about these lies, and they're the sorts of people I'm worried about, because I won't say swing voter, possibly maybe it is a swing voter, but that's the sort of lie that has plausible deniability. I mean, it's technically, that could happen in the realms of possibility. It's a believable lie. It's not true, and that's what we do. We try and debunk that. But you're not going to... So what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is Reform are going to be successful when they say, look, I'm not racist, but immigration is out of control. We're seeing violence on our streets. That's the shit that convinces Labour voters. What doesn't convince these people is to say, we're in communism, the World Economic Forum is controlling everything, and we have no free speech because of this weird thing behind it. Most people go, what the fuck are you talking about? Shut up.
Yeah, so, that's a good point as well, actually. And to bring it onto a very serious point about immigration, you know, I was reading just a few weeks ago that I can't remember which organization it is, but a government body has basically said that on the current tracks, the demand that we will need to bring people over in terms of work visas, in terms of the prediction of how many foreign students are going to come, that basically by, I think it's like 2028, immigration is going to go down to in the 300,000. So Labour, regardless of whether that's their fault or not in any way, will be able to turn around and just before the next election and be like, the year that we came in, it was 1.2 million. Now it's down to 300,000. So when it comes from that angle of immigration, what will they have to stand on? If it has in fact gone down and it actually follows those trends, what will they be able to say?
This has been an argument for years. I mean, I was scrolling through TikTok earlier and I came across a clip from an episode of Wife Swap, and it was from 2007, and it was this one of the wives who was being swapped was a racist stay-at-home mom, didn't work. Her and her partner had never voted. They didn't vote. They didn't think there was any point in voting. And the swap was with a family of Labour members. The wife of the Labour family was a Labour councillor, and they had a 16-year-old daughter who just joined the Labour Party at 16. And when the husband from the Labour family was having a conversation with the wife from the other family, you know, he said to her, he said, well, so what do you hate immigrants then? And she was like, well, yeah. And he was like, well, why? And he was like, well, look at them. It's all these asylum seekers are coming here. We can't get a job. We can't do this. And there's all these asylum seekers coming. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that this episode of Wife Swap had been filmed, 12 months ago, but it was 2007. But all the arguments that she was making as to why she doesn't like immigration and all of the problems with asylum seekers are exactly the same arguments that people are making today. And this was 2007. So has it actually even changed that much? You know, because
well, I mean, the arguments obviously haven't changed, because you need to. I mean,
what I'm getting at though
is
that it doesn't seem to matter whether immigration levels are at an all-time high, whether refugee levels are at an all-time low.
Absolutely,
people are always going to point the finger at asylum seekers and immigrants and say they're the reason that we haven't got anything, because it's always happened historically.
Well, throughout, and this is a very interesting point, because throughout history, regardless of immigration levels, majority of populists have always had a negative. I mean, not always huge majorities of people, but have always had a negative view of immigration. Go back to the 60s, when there was literally hardly any immigration. They would say it's wrong, because the media, going back hundreds of years, used all these tactics. And I mean, that's something that is a lie we need to debunk, and is a point we need to continually make, is that immigration levels, they matter, but they don't matter to these people. Because it doesn't matter whether it's 10,000 or 1 million, the lie is the same, right? Now, of course, if people want to talk about immigration levels, I don't think you're racist for doing that. But the point is, there will be people throughout history that will try and blame other people. And that line never really changes. It slightly changes its flavour. But yeah, it's largely the same. And I think as well, what that proves to me is that people aren't sort of feeling a squeeze from immigration. They're starting to notice things, and then someone confirms it. I just think that it's all just fed through the media. I mean, I saw a really funny clip of James Acaster. I don't know where he was, but he was speaking to this older man. He was like, you're concerned about immigration. He's like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, they're everywhere. And he sort of looks around. It's like a really quiet place. Like, well, we'll be busy later. And he's sort of trying to say to him, he's like, oh, okay, so you don't actually feel like there's a lot of immigration around here. You just told it was. And once again, it's true that in places with higher amounts of immigration, where you actually spend more time with people who look different, there's actually, the populace has a more positive view of immigration than in places where there's low amounts of immigration. I mean, fucking Clacton's a great example. I mean, Reform and Nigel Farage just won there. It's hardly a place where there's huge amounts of migration. Migration is bigger in bigger cities.
It's about 97% white British, Curtis, are in and around those numbers. 97% white British, according to the last census in Clacton.
Yeah, in the places where they have the highest amount of white British people and smaller levels of immigration, they're more concerned about it. So it actually has an opposite effect, which again proves to me that there isn't some sort of like underlying feeling people have when it comes to immigration, and then someone confirms it. It is simply the media that has platformed it for years, and which is why it really annoys me that so many people will attack Reform in Nigel Farage, but don't look at themselves. The Liberals don't look at themselves.
It's the fear of the unknown as well.
The BBC don't look at themselves. They'll happily look at the result and say, "Oh, here's the result of us drumming up the right-wing talking points, right? Giving credit to it. Oh, but look at Reform. That's really, really bad." And it's like, well, you played your part.
But it's easier to convince a guy in Clacton, right, that Tower Hamlets is a no-go area than it is to convince someone in Tower Hamlets that Tower Hamlets is a no-go area. Because all the white people living in Tower Hamlets know that it isn't a no-go area, right? So you have to sort of pick your audience at a place where, somewhere in the country where they're not gonna understand, which is why it's like places like Skegness and Boston and those places that are quite largely white British. That they go after.
Can I just quickly go back to the idea of advising reform, like we did earlier in the episode? Is that, if I wanted to appeal to voters and reduce immigration, the only way to actually reduce immigration is to tackle the issues and why we rely on immigration. So I'm not coming from this as a point of like immigration's bad, because it's not. But if you practically wanted to reduce it, you need to look at why we have so many immigrants. So if I was Nigel Farage writing the manifesto or the promise or whatever the hell he called it, one massive chunk would be uni students. So why do we rely on bringing 400,000 uni students and applying those visas? Because our universities rely so much on them coming over and subsidizing our universities. Why? Because we don't have free access to education at a higher level. So if I was Nigel Farage, I think the calculation is around 12 billion a year. If we gave the universities 12 billion a year, they wouldn't need to rely on foreign students, and you would literally take a third of the immigration away. Like, that would be a beautiful idea. Let's give everybody free higher education, right? So that could be something that's practical, which would as a second order effect, reduce immigration in a very practical way. And you can do that with so many other systems. If we actually fix the systems that are broken, we could, as a second order effect, we could reduce immigration, but not with the motivation of being anti-immigration, but with the motivation of we need to fix the systems that are broken, that are relying on immigration.
The problem with that is you have to pretend to care that you actually want to fix the problems, because they don't actually want to fix the broken system. That's the point.
I mean, there are many people in reform who don't want immigration to go down because that's their grift. I don't think all of them. I think Nigel Farage does, because if you look at him back in history, I mean, the guy's a fascist. I would happily say Farage is a fascist, because I mean he went out on fascist marches when he was a kid. I mean, there's a bit like a long history of racism and standing by fascists. He probably does. He does believe in what he says to an extent. I mean, he cares more about his material needs in being wealthy. But there are people within reform who probably don't actually want that issue being fixed. And let's link that to the US. Like, Donald Trump doesn't want to fix the immigration issue, despite the fact that that's all he talks about, because there was a chance when they could have supported the US Democrats on this border bill, which would have made immigration harder. It was like more strict regulation on immigration, and Trump instructed the GOP to vote against it because there's an election coming up, so they want to.
And it was one of the most right wing bills that the Democrats ever signed off on. It was incredibly right wing. Like, I think AOC opposed it as well, and. Another tactic that I think, actually going back to this idea what you were talking about earlier, Callum, with Nigel Farage being in Parliament, is that I think they might pull similar tactics to what the US are doing right now. So Donald Trump's trying to trigger a shutdown because he thinks it'll make the Democrats look bad somehow. They want to try and put through another bill, which basically, what is it? Like, they want to stop illegal immigrants from being able to vote, even though that's already illegal, and the Democrats are opposing it because it's a stupid law that wouldn't make any sense. So it makes it look like the Democrats are like pro-immigration. I feel like this is kind of what Nigel Farage might do. You know, I imagine a day in the future where he's going to say, I introduced a bill in Parliament. He's on his show and he goes, I introduced a bill in Parliament to do this, to do that, and the establishment have turned me down and they're all against me. I feel like this is a mechanism that he could use, and the Reform Party could use in the future, where they're going to, say, we introduced this bill, nobody's signing off of it, everyone's against us. Straight out of the Trump American playbook.
I mean, the Conservatives have done that for years, haven't they? They've put in a bill, and then within that bill, it'll be something so egregious and has nothing to do with the original bill. Like, it could be like, we're going to cut welfare payments, and they'll put it in there, and obviously the opposition is forced to vote against it because they want to cut welfare payments, even though the original bill is on something else. And they'll say, look, they voted against it. Reform absolutely will do that. I mean, they'll probably I wouldn't be surprised if they're putting a bill about reducing immigration, and within it, like, right, completely privatise the NHS. See, Wes Streeton's glee, not all Labour MPs are going to vote for that. So they'll vote against it and say, oh, look, Labour vote against stricter immigration. It's like, look at the fine print. That's just our fucked up system. I want to talk about culture, actually, because I actually think we're only tackling half the argument here. We're talking about immigration. We've spoken about it a lot, but let's be honest, culture is a very, very big thing here, which is what attracts people to right-wing politics. I mean, in that ITV Vox Pop, you heard a lot of them talk about that, whether it's Britain for British people, whether it's just this sense of nostalgia back to what was somehow before. I think culture is really important to talk about, because my view about culture is, I think culture has been decimated. But for me, I don't think culture has been decimated through immigration. I think it's through capitalism. Think how everything has become commercialized. Everything is now for profit. And all the things that we used to kind of enjoy is being completely destroyed under this neoliberal economic system. No one's links culture to capitalism, and I find that very interesting. I mean, if you look at the biggest changes over the decades, what's been the biggest driving force towards it? I would say it's neoliberalism, free market economics. I mean, even if we were to talk about a very simple one, is to talk about how we don't even have like a 9 till 5 culture anymore, whereas like or the family's together on the weekends. They get the work during the week, and then the family all go out for a nice day trip on the weekend. Can't do that anymore because insecure work, the gig economy, people working longer hours for lower wages. People can't afford to do shit anymore. They can't go out. I mean, actually, I don't know who I was talking to about this, but if you look at nights out, right? I know it's not a family thing, but if you look at nights out, it's older people because younger people can't do it. So a lot of culture has been destroyed, not by immigration, not by wokeism, but the economic systems we live under. And again, the right never bring that up. And I don't think the left really talk about that either.
Well,
we're all spending too much money on avocado toast and coffees. That's why.
That's what it is. In Reform's defence, the slogan for the conference was "family, community, and country." Which,
but what's the most pro-family policy you can think of? I think higher welfare payments is one. Scrapping the 2-child benefit cap is one, or is another. That's very, and I think that's a
abortion bans probably. That's probably. I mean, I'm just that's probably. I imagine that's the sort of thing. I don't know if they actually are a pro-abortion ban, but do you know what I mean? Like, but it's that sort of it feels like, it does feel like that almost right-wing Christianity style of the Republican Party in the US, community, family, country. Because like you say, we, as a result of capitalism, we haven't got, you talked about the 9 to 5 and being able to go home and sit down with your family at the end of the day and have a family meal. And people don't do that anymore. That just isn't the way that, some families do, or they try to, but a lot of families will have a family night one night a week, where all the family can sit around the table, or it might be on a Sunday afternoon or whatever, when all the family can sit around the table and have a meal together. But it's the only time all the family can get together because the kids are at after school clubs and the parents are working funny shifts, and some parents are working at the weekends, and some people are, parents are working in the evenings. And I feel like Farage and co, they when they talk about taking our country back, they want to go back to that sort of way of like the 50s and 60s, where you would go and do an office job 9 to 5 and then come home.
I don't think they want to go back to that. I think they're trying to signal to people that they want to go back to that. But what they really mean is they just want a white country. Yeah. So, so obviously those that are saying it, they mean, we want to go back to something that we all love. And they'll say family, community, which is another fascist talking point. For them, they think the reason why that's collapsed, the culture of Britain or its community is collapsed because of wokeism, of immigration, of attitudes that have changed, and degeneracy. I mean, they'll link it to being trans somehow. And they completely leave out the biggest reason behind it is the economy and how there was work. I mean, like people's workers' rights have gone down. If there's a correlation between weakening unions and less bargaining power, and now people kind of accept what they're told to do at the workplace. So, I mean, people work. Single parents got 2 to 3 different jobs. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, even 30 years ago, a single parent could probably, just about get by on one job, and now they're doing all these things. And that's because of all the immigrants that are in the country, guys.
Well,
exactly, and they want to say it's a moral decay, but it's not. It's just capitalism being completely unrestricted, and successive governments have stripped away the strong regulations and also collective bargaining to fight against the worst evils of capitalism. Successive governments have done that, and that's exactly what Reform supports. They are Thatcherites. So it's funny because in a way they don't want to fix the problem, as we were sort of alluding to earlier, because even if they wanted this idea that they say they want, they can't do it with the policies they've got anyway.
But if we really want to talk about like how capitalism has fucked up British culture in line with the mysterious economy that we always talk about, and how everything has gone wrong, let's talk about how many manufacturing jobs have been lost in this country, right? When we think about the areas that are voting for reform, when we're talking about especially areas in the northeast who have massively moved from Labour to Reform, a lot of their jobs have gone abroad. Why? Because it's cheaper. it's more efficient for those companies to import from China, from Vietnam, because their bottom line is profit and their shareholders. Why is it that our retirement ages are moving up? Because we don't have enough money in the economy for everything to run. So instead of retiring at 60, like they do in France or whatever it is, by the time we retire, if we're still working on 9 to 5s, which we hopefully won't be, please support Turn Left Media. Just a little plug there. We're going to be retiring at 71. Why? Because the capitalist economy demands that we do it. Why is it that we have sold off all of our cultural institutions to these massive capitalist structures, right? If we want to appeal to reform voters, who owns your football team? Is it a British owner? No, it's some Saudi prince who's got hundreds of billions of pounds in his pocket because of all the oil that they sell, right? We've sold.
Yeah, but when the football team lose the match, though, that's the reason why. You see, it's like it's like when England play and all the black players didn't score and we lost the match. It was because they were black that it was a problem. Yet when they score the goals and we win, they put them up on a pedestal and they're celebrating it.
But Lewis makes a great point there. Though. I think, they blame black players, but we're talking about the owners of the clubs. Well, football is an important cultural institution in this country, and it's been massively taken away by by corporations. I mean, even just think about watching football on TV. I mean, it used to be on the BBC, and that was it. Now you've got Sky News, you've got what are the other ones called? BT Sport, all these different massive channels now splitting up football, making it and charging you for it, making it unaffordable just to watch it. All these things, and that is all through capitalism. And yet that, to me, is a very strong link between culture and capitalism, which, to be fair, is one bit of hope where I think we can reach these people by real socialist politics, though. I mean, obviously, liberals I call Labour liberals, not even liberals anymore, but their brand of politics obviously doesn't reach them whatsoever. And I think the only way to counteract reform is to go more left, is to be more socialist, is to talk about more grassroots football. I mean, the only politician I know who talked about trying to bring football back to the grassroots was Jeremy Corbyn. He talked about a very popular policy.
But it's also,
looking at
some. If we look at who owns our water companies, right? It's very famously known, or I hope it is, that the French pension fund owns a massive chunk of a lot of the water companies in the UK. Right? We don't even own our own water. A foreign country's pension fund does. Most of our food brands, all gone. They're literally been taken over by multinational companies. Aunt Bess's, do you like your Sunday dinner? Aunt Bess's is owned by Americans. Pretty much everything has been bought up by multinationals. Everything's been privatized. Almost all of our institutions are, if not owned or part owned by foreign companies and multinationals. We have sold off our entire country, and then we wonder why we have all the problems that we have. But then when we point these things out, we're communists or evil socialists who want to tear down the country.
Well, we should be happy because the country is communist now, Lewis. The government are communist. We should be happy about that.
Yeah. No, but what I mean is they say that they say these things are derogatory term when they fundamentally don't understand anything that they're saying when they throw these words.
What I will say, though, there was a poll that came out and it did show there was a question for the British people. It said, what would you rather, fascism or communism? And a lot of people, more people support communism over fascism. So there is some hope. But
speaking of polls, Curtis, I'm just looking at some YouGov polling actually from just literally the past couple of days, and Britons generally have an unfavourable view of reform. Reform voters have a very favourable opinion of the party, while other Britons tend to view them negatively. But on Conservative voters, so 28% view reform as somewhat unfavourable, and 19% of Conservative voters view them as very unfavourable. But when it comes to Labour and Lib Dems, it's 11% somewhat and 72% very for Labour voters, and 15% somewhat and 69% very for Lib Dem voters. So actually, I think what we were saying earlier about, where if Reform are going to try and, appeal to a certain number of voters, it's a very small, very minute number of Labour voters that actually view them even, or that even don't know how they view them. So I think it's going to be the Conservatives where they're going to pull those voters for rather than
but I think that can change, and I think that is all down to Keir Starmer's Labour government.
Just on that, 39% of all Britons view Reform UK as both extremist and say they should not be near power. And under first past the post, if you've got nearly 40% of the country saying you shouldn't be near power, it's unlikely you're going to win a first past the post election. I mean, like you say, that can and probably will change over time, but as it stands right now.
But I just to sort of get back to what we were talking about before, I want to say that Lee Anderson is right about, I can't get my words out, is right about one thing, and he says he wants his country back. I want my country back. We want our country back, but we want our country back from the profiteers. I want my country back from privatization. I mean, you're absolutely right. You talk about Thames Water. That's our fucking water. Yet we've got multi-millionaire billionaires profiting off our services that we need, putting shit in the water because they don't give a fuck about cleaning it up and putting proper infrastructure in there and then charging us for it. I want that back. I want that under government control and completely free. I want it with every other essential service. I want housing. I want my housing back. I don't want speculators. I don't want private landlords. I don't want people with huge portfolios. I don't want oligarchs from different countries owning properties in this country that are empty just to use as an investment vehicle. Fuck that. I want the government bringing it back in, building houses, and I want free housing. I want to decommodify housing. I mean, that might be radical to some people, but I tell you what, I think that's easier to sell than saying that foreign oligarchs are known it. So Lee Anderson is right about wanting our country back. And I think majority of people deep down know that. And that's why that tagline, let's get our country back, or take back control, which is really good for Brexit, because deep down people are so unsatisfied with the capitalist system, are unsatisfied that we don't own anything anymore. From your house that you're renting to on a macro level. On our services, we don't own it anymore. We don't feel like we have a stake in society, and society has been completely destroyed. That started with Thatcherism, and people feel that, and that's when you get demagogues come in and say, "Let's take back control." You can have that feeling of community again, but obviously for them it's immigration and brown people. But the left needs to do the same messaging. Take back control, but from the profiteers, from the rich people who are looting this country for their own gain.
30p Lee's argument falls apart though, because he then goes on to say, and I'll get the exact wording of it. He says, I want my country back, and the country I am talking about would not tolerate this stupidity. And he was tagging that on. He said this back in May in a statement he put out on Twitter, but he was tagging this on in his speech again in conference. He talked a bit about, like the example I gave earlier of just because a boy wants to play with dolls doesn't make him a girl. I want my country back, and the country I'm talking about wouldn't tolerate this stupidity. There are refugees. Well, he doesn't call them refugees, does he? But there are migrants coming over in boats and being put into hotels, and we're paying for that. I want my country back, and the country I'm talking about wouldn't tolerate this stupidity. But he's not offering like what you've just offered there. He's not offering an actual something substantive to say, I want my country back from this, and this is how we're going to do it. He's saying, I want my country back because right now it's stupid. And he sounds like a petulant little child in the playground, doesn't he? Well, I want it back because this is stupid. That's what he sounds like.
Lee Anderson is the type of person who will complain about, the cost of a pint and how much it costs now, and young people aren't drinking and all this type of stuff. But we need to look at why is it that pint costs so much now compared to just a few years ago. My dad is that type of person who, he sees London through the lens of how much a pint costs, because that's who he is. He's just a working class bloke from Yorkshire. And
I think that's a valid observation if you ask me.
You guys and your beer. I don't drink beer, so no. Yeah. But anyway,
I do it on the price of Freddos. So price
of Freddos, but that doesn't change everywhere though. That's not a regional thing.
Universal.
It's universal. But anyway, so the point is that Lee Anderson is the type of person who will, moan about the price of a pint, but who owns that company, right? Who owns the company that you're getting a pint from? Is it a big chain of pubs? And where is that pub? Because he'll complain on Twitter on a Thursday night before he goes back to Ashfield that he's in a pub right around the corner from Parliament. And it'll be £8 a pint. Why is it like that? It's because the landlord will be some massive private foreign international conglomerate company who has consistently charged higher and higher rents every single year consistently, and that drink that you're drinking will be produced by a company whose bottom line is profit above shareholders, right? That pint has to go up every year as much as we possibly can, and once that company stops making profit or it fails, it's like out with the CEO, let's bring somebody else in who's going to fatten the shares and continue producing money, right? And that's the root of the issues that they keep complaining about, and they're not looking at that, right? We've got Kamala Harris in the US talking about going after price gouging, whether that's just all faux rhetoric to appeal to people because inflation's been such an issue. I'd love to see that over here. Imagine if Reform turned around and said, we're going to go after these price gouges. We're going to have to go after the Tesco CEO whose salary's doubled in the space of a few years. Why is it that your bread now costs twice as much as it did 3 years ago, but the Tesco CEO, his salary's gone to 10 million quid a year? Like, imagine if they got on that type of bandwagon. Obviously, I'd love for the Labour Party to be doing this.
That doesn't go viral.
That ain't going to happen anytime soon.
That doesn't go viral. That doesn't get people, getting angry on TikTok. That doesn't sell front pages of newspapers. Why is the price? It's important.
A lot of
it's really
radical
important
people on TikTok,
but but it doesn't. The beer is probably
and I do think it would sell newspapers. It's not that because it's not being printed because it doesn't sell. It would sell very well. It's not being printed because the owners of the papers are those same kind of people that you don't want to tax more. They have an incentive not to publish those sort of stories. But let's talk about another Reform MP, Rupert Lowe. His speech was probably crazy. I mean, you saw a clip of him earlier. He talked about institutions that are undermining us or undermining our free speech, and he lays the blame on the EU, the World Economic Forum, the UN, and Blair and his socialist dream. He also blames crony capitalism. Now, obviously, free speech has been attacked so much that he was able to give his speech at conference, which was televised across the country. Callum, what do you make of Rupert Lowe? And what do you make of the fact that free speech is being undermined by Tony Blair's socialist dream?
Well, I actually, just on the point of free speech, I find it really upsetting. Actually, every time that I see these people, that have been silenced, that are not allowed to have the right to speak, their freedom of speech, they've had that removed from them, and it really breaks my heart every time I see these people on national television or on the radio or on the YouTube channel that they have, or on Twitter or on TikTok or on Facebook or on Instagram or on the front pages of all the newspapers, telling their story about how they've been silenced. I just think it really tugs at the heartstrings, because to be able to share that story so widely is really
kind of makes you tear up a little bit, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Wait, hang on a second. So they're on Instagram, they're on YouTube, they're on the front page of the newspapers, they're all over the national television,
they're in Parliament,
on Twitter, they're in Parliament as well. They've been silenced and they're not allowed to speak. Make it make sense. That's my first point. I'm going around the long way around it, but genuinely,
don't forget 2 of them have a TV show as well.
2 of them have their own TV show on a channel that they're always going to be.
Yeah, but that's not free speech enough. They need more. Give them another show.
I'm more interested in the people who actually are silenced. Like victims of domestic violence, for example, who don't have their voice heard because they are locked in their houses and can't get out to speak. Let's talk about those people. If you want to talk about people being silenced, let's talk about the children in parts of the world who are in labor camps. Let's talk about the people who are in abusive relationships or that are being forced to sign non-disclosure agreements by the pervy boss in some multi-million-pound company who's stopping them from being able to talk about something horrific that's happened to them. Those are the real people that are being silenced in this country, and across the world. Not these far right, politicians or people that are, commentary makers. What's the word I'm looking for? What's the word? You know what I mean? It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. As for the conspiracy side of things that Mr. Lowe and the others like to push, I mean, Blair's socialist dream sounds quite nice, actually. Can we have that?
He's threatening us with a good time.
I'd quite
a socialist
like
dream that Tony Blair concocted. I'd love to see how much of a
it's not
socialist
here.
Tony Blair was.
I mean, look, we've left the European Union, so how the European Union are responsible for any of our problems now? Like, wasn't Brexit supposed to solve that, just like it was supposed to solve immigration? When those people talk about free speech, they mean the freedom to use slurs and sexually harass. That's exactly what they mean. That's the problem. So the EU aren't to blame because we've left the EU. And if the EU is still a problem, then I just have to ask, well, what was the reason for Brexit then? Because if Brexit hasn't solved the issues that the EU were causing, does that mean that maybe that Brexit wasn't the way to deal with that problem? Perhaps could it possibly be that? As for the WEF, I mean, I'm not even gonna get into that. One, I don't know an awful, I don't know enough about it to talk about it with any sort of sense. But also, it comes up every time, and I think that most of the people that talk about it don't understand it either. So
I mean, to be fair, I've had a lot of comments over the years on Turn Left, people talking about WEF. I mean, I'll happily talk about World Economic Forum because WEF is, again, being pushed by the right, that there's some secret organization that's pushing communism, whatever. WEF is actually pretty damn simple, and it's not interesting like that in any way. It's quite boring. It's just an economic forum where capitalists and billionaires meet up.
It's just conference for the rich, basically, isn't it?
It's conference for rich, and they just sit and circle jerk, and they say, "Oh, how can we make the world better?" And they go, "Well, we're going to do it by, I don't know, startups and innovation, by tinkling around the edges." There's nothing fantastical about WEF. Yeah, I see it so much because they think it's some secret thing. Trust me, WEF ain't secret. If it was a secret, we wouldn't know about it, right? It is literally just a circle jerk of capitalists, a bunch of people talking about how they can fix capitalism or whatever. That's all it is. There's nothing to it.
It's QAnon adjacent though as well. Don't forget about that. Like, it ties into this idea of these powerful people. You can find a few of the Epstein types who have all basically been to Davos. Like, because so many rich and powerful people go to this meeting every single year, along with pretty much lots of world leaders and yada yada yada, is that you can tie all these people who've been convicted literally as pedophiles and sex offenders, and it ties into this like QAnon conspiracy theory, which then ties into loads of other conspiracy theories as well. So this is why, when you said earlier, most people have literally no idea what WEF is, and it is for those like online crazies. What's also funny is that when I speak to people and they bring up WEF, they'll be like, "Oh, have you seen this document that they've published?" And they'll extract one line from it, and they think it somehow confirms their conspiracy. Like, if this was a genuine conspiracy, do you think they'd be publishing their documents on their website to tell you about how they're going to reduce the population? These people are capitalists. They want babies. They want more people in this world. Their entire system relies on constant growth in every aspect. If you think that they're trying to reduce the population, that ultimately goes against everything that they need to maintain their power. It's ridiculous.
You linked it to QAnon because basically a lot of people who use WEF is a dog whistle, and I mean Jews. They just think a lot of people probably think WEF is literally just a group of Jewish people. That's what. I mean, I've said this multiple times now, but the more left wing I've become, the less conspiratorial I've become, because I feel like I can see, when you're left wing, right, you see the structures in place. Yeah. So we can understand. Oh, all right, well, we live under global capitalism. There's no conspiracy here. People just, are living under capitalism. They're doing the best they can, which is their own material interests. But under capitalism, that means being selfish, right? It discourages working with other people and working in a cooperative manner. It's about the individual, right? And there's nothing like shady going on. I mean, I think it's a fucked up system, but it's not like it's not where people sort of go, how can we like destroy the world? Like, that doesn't happen.
But
Even
we
when it
know
comes to
that.
the media. Well, yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say, and I think it's important to point that to people, because even the media, a lot of the right complain. I mean, we complain about the media, so does the right, but the right will say the media lies, and it's a group of people in suits who are just trying to like pull strings, and it's not, right? People in the media think they're doing good quality journalism. They're not sat there coming up with a conspiracy. They're just biased. They don't realize they're biased. And I think once you understand the structures that in place, you become less conspiratorial. It's less about shady secret groups, and it's just very obvious that, oh well, okay, money and influence has an effect on our political systems. It's very simple to understand.
There's a bigger issue at play here, though, particularly with reform. When they're talking about WEF, when they talk about the EU, when they talk, using these dog whistles, and they get into the, I mean, Richard Tice, for example, was talking about net zero, and as did Lee Anderson, actually, and I'm sure Mr. Lowe did as well. In terms of the fiction around it and how it's all just a conspiracy theory, essentially. I mean, he didn't use those words, but that's what he was getting at. But Richard Tice said something that, and I can't remember what it was he was referring to, but it really sent some red flags waving in front of me. He said, "Are you wound up about this?" And everyone went, "Yeah." And he went, "Excellent." And that is exactly what they want. The reason they talk about the World Economic Forum, the reason that they talk about the all these sort of conspiratorial issues, as well as the transgender conversations, immigration, all the culture war stuff, it's because they want to appeal to people emotionally. They want people to be wound up. When Richard Tice says, "Are you wound up about this?" and everyone says yes, his response is excellent, because they want you to be wound up. Because when we're wound up, when we're angry, when we're emotional, we're easier to manipulate, and we're less likely to look at the facts. I mean, we know this psychologically and biologically with the way that the brain works, right? When we are thinking with our emotional and immediately sort of responsive part of the brain, we are not using the logical part of the brain. And if parties like Reform can get their followers to be angry all the time and to be emotional all the time, they're not going to be asking the questions that we're talking about tonight. They're not going to be sat here and saying, well, all right, but why is it that things are the way they are? Why is it that my pint costs more money? Who's responsible? Why is it that the community centre's closed down and there's dog shit on the floor? They're not going to be saying that. What they're going to be doing instead is they're going to be saying, "I'm angry and you should be angry too. Let's all be angry together. We're angry. And then let's vote Reform, because Reform are going to stop us from being angry." But what they're actually doing is they're encouraging them to be angry, literally to the point where they're saying, "Are you wound up? Excellent. Good. You should be wound up by this." They want you to be riled up and wound up.
But I do want to bring another quick element into this, as we're talking still about like the idea of conspiracy, right? So, when we talk about the left and us seeing the structure, so therefore we're less conspiratorial, let's talk about a conspiracy that does have legs, because obviously there are things out there, actual potential conspiracies that do exist, which have some legs. So let's bring them up. Let's talk about the fact that
about the king killing Princess Diana. Oh, sorry.
Exactly.
That one's got legs.
No, let's talk about the fact that Nigel Farage has been funded by Aaron Banks, who's literally being accused, but again not substantiated. Don't want to get sued. Aaron Banks of being a Russian asset, along with his wife, who's been accused of being a Russian spy. Let's talk about how the fact that Nigel Farage fully backs Donald Trump, who tried to steal an election in the US, whose supporters have been fueled by Russian propaganda. Everything from QAnon all the way to most of the conspiracies that they believe in actually tie back to a lot of Russian bots. Let's not forget that just recently, Mr. Tommy Robinson, a guy who used to run his website, came out and said he gets a lot of donations from Russia. Just very recently, last week, who was it? The AP, I think, came out with an article linking about 10 right-wing pundit influencers to being paid by Russians. A lot of all this type of right-wing conspiracy stuff, a lot of it can be traced back to Russia and foreign. What's the word? Foreign. Anyone help me? Not interference is another word for it, but anyway, you get the gist. This is a conspiracy that has legs. Why? Do I necessarily completely believe everything about this? No, because I require evidence in the things that I want to make statements about and speculate about, which these all have evidence for. Do I necessarily believe that like Nigel Farage is a Russian asset? No, I don't believe that. Do I believe that Tommy Robinson is a Russian asset? No, I just believe that these people are potentially being, fueled and helped by these, whether they know it or not. Because why? Russia thrives off of our.
I mean, some of them are useful idiots.
Our
They don't necessarily
polarization.
need to be subscribed to it, but they're definitely useful idiots.
Exactly,
Which
yeah.
in the material sense is the same thing, regardless.
Yeah, and as long as foreign governments keep us all arguing about issues which aren't relevant and keep pointing where many people will point their fingers at things which aren't the problems, we won't get anything done, and things will continue to get worse. Which is why we need to focus on the real issues, and reform don't offer anything of such in any of their policies or lack of policies thereof.
Okay, Callum, what's your final thoughts then? About reform, about the conference, and maybe the future, or even the next couple of months.
I'm genuinely frightened at what could happen in the future in this country with reform and the way that they are. And I think part of that is just because I watched a lot of the coverage from conference and was absolutely appalled by what I was hearing and what I was seeing. And I need to remind myself that I was watching that within its own bubble. If anyone's watching's ever been to a political conference, you'll know that pretty much. Well, I'm sure the Conservatives won't feel this way this time around, but generally speaking, the party makes you feel. The conference makes you feel hopeful for the future for that party, and everyone's all in the same room together, and you've all got the same beliefs and the same ideologies, roughly, and it can feel quite hopeful. But I think what scared me was the enthusiasm with which people were cheering and clapping and responding to some of the horrific dog whistles that were being touted from the stage. I'm not going to lie, I'm slightly scared, and I'm hoping that either of you are gonna put me at ease when you come to speak in a minute. I'm slightly scared by the confidence in which they seem to have that they can win the next general election. I don't think they will, and I don't think they will for reasons that we've talked about already, including the grassroots issue and so on. But I do think they'll make some gains. But what worries me is if that is genuinely their aim, and they are going to try and push for that. What scares me more is what damage they're going to do to the country in the meantime without getting into power, because we already know, as we've talked about, how influential Nigel Farage has been in this country when he's not been in Parliament. And I worry that after Brexit, we know that reports in hate crimes went up. There was more racism on the streets after Brexit. We know that happened. And I think what worries me is that, and I feel like we saw the same with the riots. Now that we've got 4 members of Parliament that represent a party that stand for racism, xenophobia, all the other hateful things that they stand for and that they push out, it makes you racist that lives next door, that would normally be quiet about it, feel a bit more confident showing that in public. And I worry that over the next couple of years, especially in the next 12 months or so, because I'm sure they will make some gains at local elections, that we're going to see a rise in hate crime, we're going to see a rise in transphobia, we're going to see a rise in racism, and that is going to be fueled, even though reform will say that they're not about that and that they don't want the bigots, it is going to be fueled through the dog whistles of that party. So that makes me fearful. On a more positive note, though, when it comes to a wider point on reform, I feel like we on the left have got a brilliant opportunity now, because unless something really terrible happens, or unless there's another pandemic or there's a war or something a bit crazy that affects everyone globally, it's realistically we're not going to have another general election for at least 4 years, probably 5, and it gives us a little bit of time to play with, where we've got a Labour government who aren't doing particularly great, and we're going to have to keep holding to account, which could help parties like Reform, but it also gives us an opportunity to regroup on the left, get a proper grassroots movement going, work out how the left can actually work together instead of fighting amongst ourselves, as we seem to have been really good at doing under the Tories leadership over the last 14 years, and looking at ways that we can actually get out on doorsteps, mix with people, talk to people, and make people realize that, you know, yeah, all the things that Reform UK are telling you, a lot of those things are true. You know, you are worse off than you were 10 years ago. It is harder to get a job than it has been before for a lot of people. We do have less money in our pocket than we've had before, and everything costs a lot more money than it did. But we have the time to educate people on the reasons for that. Things like Lewis has alluded to tonight and talked a lot about, you know, that we need to look at why these things are the way that they are. And I feel like we've got time to have those conversations and to educate people on that. But I just urge everyone that has any capacity to do it, whether it's through your unions, whether it's through the political party that you're affiliated with, whether it's through social media, to start that work now, because we need people, particularly the undecided or the swing voters, we need people to see that there is hope for the future, and we do need change from the status quo. And that does mean that we also need to get rid of this current Labour government. But the way to do it is through progressive left-wing politics, not for the populist vote, because the populist vote will not make our lives better. It will just see the elite who are pretending to be working class gain more power, line their back pockets, and, you know, we might get a pat on the back for electing them, and that'll be it. And I'm going to stop rambling and ranting, but that's sort of my I don't know if that answered your question, but those are my fans.
You answered multiple questions there. Thank you. Lewis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to signpost people a little bit. I had somebody, not to get too serious, but a little bit serious. I had somebody very close to me who went down the conspiracy rabbit hole, and it's the type of stuff that people like Nigel Farage and the Reform Party push. And I feel like when it comes to remedying people who might have gone down the same rabbit hole, I don't think the answer is to shame them. I will happily be on the show and on my TikTok account, and I will happily shame people in power and hold them accountable. It's different. Unfortunately, the human mind is sometimes fickle, and we have lots of problems in this world, and sometimes people get convinced that issues are caused by things that they're not, and they get caught up in this. And when it comes to anyone who might be watching, whose family members or friends might be, you know, leaning towards reform or any of these type of issues and situations, I would say the answer is not to shame them, it's just to have a conversation and try and understand them. You know, I came from a place where usually, you know, I would just shout back at people like, oh, the thing that you're saying is stupid or racist or homophobic. But now I go down the route of mostly, when I can, have the patience to try and understand how that person got there, because I think it's the only way we can kind of move forward. So be wary of stuff that Reform are saying for the sake of your friends and family, because unfortunately, you know, they may grow. I may be wrong. I may be wrong that they've reached their ceiling. Ceilings are leaky. Ceilings can collapse, and maybe they will attract more voters in the future. But I think the best way to combat that with anybody who's watching, which I doubt is many Reform voters, is just have conversations with people and help them understand that the issues that they think are happening in this world aren't usually connected to the problems that people like Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are highlighting. Chat with people. That's it.
Very wise, very, very wise, and something we can all probably do. I mean, sometimes I'm quick to jump on people.
No.
You're absolutely right there. I mean, my takeaway from this is that, I mean, I want to actually echo what Les Watts said in the chat. I mean, I am worried about elections from the right, because he said in the find the comment. Okay, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. So he says, I'm not worried about the right winning elections. I'm worried about the centre-left and liberal Tories will crumble in the face of pressure. Now, of course, I am worried about right winning elections. But for me, the biggest worry from conference is a lot of the things they talked about, all right, won't necessarily convince loads and loads of people, maybe just the faithful, but it will poison the debate. And unfortunately, because we have a broken media, I see the media platforming more and more of these extreme points of view. And what's going to happen is, because we don't have political parties that want to resist, namely the Labour Party, they're going to try and triangulate these arguments or even give space to them. So I'm not necessarily worried that Reform are going to be, I don't know, the next party in power. I don't think Nigel Farage is going to be Prime Minister anytime soon. But what I worry in the next 5 years is the crazy conspiracies and the talking points that have been largely imported from the US is going to make it into the mainstream and going to make it into the media. I mean, look, no one would today, people would think it's crazy that a BBC journalist would platform an argument from a Reform MP saying Haitian immigrants are coming here and eating like cats and dogs, right? That seems crazy to us now. That's happening in the US. It doesn't mean that in 5, 10, 15 years' time that these sorts of crazy talking points are platformed in the mainstream media. Don't be so naive to think that wouldn't be the case, and I think it could be. So that, to me, is what worries the most. It's the poisoning of the debate, not necessarily actually winning power, because at the end of the day, words and debate are power in of itself. That's what I take away from it. But apart from that, it was a fucking clown show. Reform have just shown they have no care for the working class. They have no answers for the working class. They have no policies or any material analysis. It was just, there are things that I don't like as an older person, and the world is changing and I'm angry about it. Whether it's vegans, whether it's wokeism, whether it's trans people, whether it's net zero, whatever, it was a grump fest. And at least in that we can take solace that we can laugh at these people. But we obviously have to tread carefully. We've had 135 concurrent viewers watching, pretty steady.
Yeah.
I want to thank everyone who's tuned in.
Just before we wrap up, Curtis, can
yes.
I just do a little plug for later in the week? So on Tuesday, I'm going to be in Liverpool outside of Labour Party conference. We're going to be covering Labour conference on Wednesday evening. I think I'm looking.
Yeah, I think that's right,
on Wednesday evening after conference finishes. I won't be on the show live, but I am going to be doing some filming outside conference on Tuesday. I don't have access to inside the building, but I am going to be trying to get vox pops from politicians, from MPs, from members of the cabinet, even if they walk past me, but certainly from conference goers and anyone that's outside protesting that's unhappy. If there is anything that you guys as Turn Left viewers would like me to ask, if there's anything particular that you'd like to see from the outskirts of conference, then please let us know. You can contact us on Twitter at Turn Left Media UK, or you can reach out to me personally on TikTok at politi_Cal. Let me know before Tuesday, and if there's anything that you want to see from Labour conference in terms of Vox Pop content from, again, outside of the conference, please just let us know, because something that we want to be able to do more of is provide more media coverage and content from elsewhere, from out on the field. So it's not just us sitting at home telling you our views. We want to get down into the nitty-gritty of everything and talk to real people and find out what others are thinking too. And we always want to include our viewers in that. So yeah, anything you'd like to see from me from conference, let us know in the next couple of days, and tune in on Wednesday evening to watch the coverage of Labour conference.
Callum, I've just got one request. Every time you see an MP, can you ask them who paid for their outfit of the day?
I will put that on my list.
That'll be a great question. You know, it's going to really rile them up, isn't it?
Who paid for your outfit today? Who are you wearing?
Who are you wearing? I love that.
I'll do that. I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, thank you for everyone who's tuned in. Please tune into our conference special of Labour. It's going to be really interesting. I'm sure Callum's going to get some really interesting interactions, as he did at the Green Party conference. But he's right. We need more supporters so we can do this more often, and we can get more reporters on the ground, rather than just sort of doing it, you know, basically take it in turns. Well, actually, it's not even being taken in turns. It's being you both times. But we need more resources so we can do that. And you can help us by helping this channel grow. So if you enjoyed our content, like this video. I mean, there's been 70 people watching on YouTube, so I hope there's at least 70 likes. Also on Twitter, you can share us and tell your friends and family about us. And also, if you can support us financially, because fortunately, things cost money, and we would like to do this full time. Now you can support us financially by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can either subscribe to us monthly, or you can give us a one-off donation. Give us all you can and nothing more. I've been Curtis Daly. You've been joined by Aaron and Callum Taylor. Another great chat. We didn't do a 2-hour conversation last time we did. This time it's been really good. Lots of interesting discussions there. We'll be back on Monday with myself at 7:30 p.m. for a normal Island Standard show. Make sure you tune in. But for everyone that's watched tonight, thank you so much. You guys are amazing. And we will see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.